Okay, in the midst of all of this that is going on, there's another very important angle that we need to discuss at this point, and that is with Canada's other partner in the CUSMA Free Trade Agreement. The president of Mexico is introducing retaliatory measures in order to respond to Donald Trump's tariff announcement. Claudia Sheinbaum says her country will impose tariffs and other measures to defend Mexico's interests. She also accused the White House of slander for accusing her government of being allied with drug trafficking organizations and providing safe havens for cartels. Now, Sheinbaum says problems are not resolved by imposing tariffs, but by talking and engaging in dialogue. The Trump administration says tariffs will take effect on Tuesday and could be raised if targeted countries retaliate. Mexico and Canada are America's top trading partners, and together they provide Americans with food, medicine, oil, cars, lumber, electronics, and a whole lot more. So let's dig a bit deeper into the Mexican part of this story. We're joined now by our next guest, Luis de la Calle. He's a former Mexican trade negotiator and economist. Luis, very good to have you on the show. Thank you for making time for us.
Thanks, Natasha, for having me. Very important day, very important issues for Canada, Mexico, and the U.S.
Yes, and you know what? Talk to me about the reaction, because for us, I mean, this happens, right? We're the Canadian broadcaster, we're all Canadians, we're so focused on what Canada's response is going to be, but you all are our partners, and you all are getting hit exactly as much as we are as well. So talk to me about how the government is reacting, how ordinary Mexicans are responding to this.
Well, I mean, Mexico and Canada are the largest trading partners of the U.S., and that is the consequence, of course, that we're neighbors, that we have an integrated supply chains in North America, and of course, 30 years of free trade among the three of us. Canada is a very large supplier to the U.S., so is Mexico, and we are also at the same time very large markets for the U.S. I mean, 30 years ago, Mexico used to be a rounding error on U.S. economic statistics. And now Mexico is large. I mean, imposing duties on Mexico will have, of course, a severe damage to the Mexican producers, Mexican exporters. No question about that. Mexico has to prepare for that. We have to look for alternatives, as you are, and your premiers in different provinces are suggesting, and we have to do the same thing on our side. But it will also damage the U.S., because in many sectors, the U.S. Consumer, the U.S. producer, depends on things coming from Mexico and Canada. And even though Donald Trump has been saying, and he's sending tweets saying that they can live only with what they produce, truth of the matter is that that is not the case. And the level of duty at 25% across the board is unprecedented. And it is unprecedented that this is done to your main markets and your main suppliers. I think the President Trump is overdoing it, and that the consequences of this will be quite severe. And I think Mexico and Canada have to have a strategy which only objectives is that these measures are reversed. Now, reversing these measures proposed by the White House is something that will depend much more on what Americans think and do and demand their own president than whatever Mexico and Canada can offer to President Trump.
And so then on that point, I mean, you've worked very closely with American negotiators. Are people in Washington pushing the president in his own administration? Maybe don't do this, maybe back off a bit.
Well, I mean, if you look at the Republican circles, people around the White House and people close to Donald Trump, they don't dare to say to the president, Mr. President, what you are doing is not good. So it might take some time, but I mean, we need to convince the Americans that this is not in their own best interest. I mean, if they're going to enter into a situation where the U.S. will become more protectionist and try to close their economy in relative terms, the worst partners to begin with that process is your neighbors, because I mean we are part of the same economic ecosystem, and we will find a lot of people in the U.S. that will have to stand up and say, listen, this is not the way to proceed. And the irony of all this is that, of course, fentanyl and migration are important issues that we have to address. I mean, there is no question about that. But in punishing legal trade I mean, looking from the Mexican side, I mean, Mexico, we're struggling to build a more modern country, and we have significant challenges. We need to promote the legal trade, the law-abiding companies, the companies that have invested to integrate themselves better to the North American economy. By punishing those people that have done things correctly, I mean, you encourage the people that do illegal things, like criminal groups that we have to fight, but we have to fight together. We cannot do it on our own. The drug trafficking is a regional issue that has to do also with all the three of us, but more with the U.S. in my view, and we need their cooperation, as President Sheinbaum said.
Luis, what industries in Mexico would feel this the most and the most quickly as well?
Well, I mean, the largest trade we do with the U.S., and this happens, of course, also with Canada, is the auto industry and the auto parts industry. I mean, the 60% of the auto parts that the U.S. imports from the world to manufacture cars in the Midwest come from Canada and Mexico. So imposing a 25% duty will doom car manufacturing in the Midwest. I mean, that is the best way to encourage importation of cars from Japan and Korea. I mean, U.S. manufacturers of autos in Michigan, in Ohio, will not be able to produce competitively if there is a 25% duty on that. And that's without taking into account the retaliation from Canada and Mexico if that comes. So I think they underestimate the level of integration. The same thing on food. I mean, Mexico's exports of agricultural products and agro-industrial products last year into the U.S. represented 26% of all U.S. global imports of food. I mean, from avocados to beer to tequila, tomatoes and bell peppers and everything else. So if these duties on agricultural products become a hindrance in terms of exporting more or have an impact on prices, U.S. consumers in California, in Texas, and many other states will begin to suffer either scarcity of Mexican products or higher prices.
Luis, I'll disclose to you that many years ago, I used to live and work in Mexico, and I was there at the time Vicente Fox got elected as the president. And I asked many of my friends and colleagues, why are you so excited? And it was precisely this ability to open up the economy to the American markets. They felt that Vicente Fox had connections to the Bush administration, and that would be very beneficial for Mexico and specifically for NAFTA, a greater expansion of NAFTA. And I know that you've worked very closely on the design of NAFTA, of implementing it. Now, sitting here today, seeing that in many ways NAFTA is being torn up, or at least being completely disrespected by these tariffs that are being brought in, what sort of position does that leave you feeling in?
Well, I mean, we'll see how this ends up. I mean, we don't know. I mean, this is just the first salvo from the White House. I mean, I think that the level of integration, the successful integration of the North American economy, Canada, Mexico, and the U.S., will withstand this challenge from Donald Trump. I mean, this is going to be, there will be a lot of ups and downs, will be very complicated. I mean, President Trump has really raised the stakes to a level that is way too much. But there's structural reasons as to why it makes eminent sense for the U.S., Canada, and Mexico to produce together. I mean, the main challenge the U.S. has economically outside the U.S. is competition with China. And when you look this sector by sector, I mean, you realize that the only way the U.S. can compete successfully with China, if it joins the creativity of Canada, the natural resources of Canada, the talent you have in Canada, and also the creativity, the workers, the abilities that we have in Mexico, because we complement each other. I mean, we have an economic system that is complementary to each other. And the country that had to make the most effort in the trade opening when we joined the agreement more than 30 years ago was, of course, Mexico, because Mexico was a closed economy that wanted to change. And we have changed quite significantly. I mean, we have a lot of issues and problems in Mexico still. But I mean, if you wanted to bet how to transform Mexico, you would support the companies, the people that are doing what's right, and try to go against those that become like an obstacle for Mexico to grow. So punish these duties that Donald Trump is proposing are a punishment not only to U.S. consumers, because they are, but also a punishment to all those people in Mexico and firms, Canadian, Mexican, U.S. firms that have invested in Mexico and have done the what's right, and have invested in terms of the rule of law and the certainty that the agreement brings to the table, which is exactly what you want for development.
Luis de la Calle, thank you so much, sir, for your patience, because I know you had to wait a bit. Thank you for making time for us today. We really appreciate it. Muchísimas gracias.
My pleasure. Gracias. Bonjour à tout le monde.
Thank you.